Section 21 of A Popular History of France, Volume 4. This recording is in the public domain. Recording by Kathy Barrett. A Popular History of France from the Earliest Times, Volume 4, by François Guizot. Translated by Robert Black. Chapter 30. Francis I. and the Reformation, Part 1. Nearly half a century before the Reformation made any noise in France, it had burst out with great force and had established its footing in Germany, Switzerland, and England. John Huss and Jerome of Prague, both born in Bohemia, one in 1373 and the other in 1378, had been condemned as heretics and burned at Constance, one in 1415 and the other in 1416, by decree and in the presence of the council which had been there assembled. But, at the commencement of the 16th century, Luther in Germany and Zwingle in Switzerland had taken in hand the work of the Reformation, and before half that century had rolled by, they had made the foundations of their new church so strong that their powerful adversaries, with Charles V. at their head, felt obliged to treat with them and recognize their position in the European world, though all the while disputing their right. In England, Henry VIII, under the influence of an unbridled passion, as all his passions were, for Anna Boleyn, had in 1531 broken with the Church of Rome, whose pope, Clement VII, refused very properly to pronounce him divorced from his wife Catherine of Aragon, and the king had proclaimed himself the spiritual head of the English Church without meeting either amongst his clergy or in his kingdom with any effectual opposition. Thus, in these three important states of Western Europe, the Reformers had succeeded, and the religious revolution was in process of accomplishment. In France it was quite otherwise. Not that there, too, there were not amongst Christians profound dissensions and ardent desires for religious reform. We will dwell directly upon its explosion, its vicissitudes, and its characteristics. But France did not contain, as Germany did, several distinct states, independent and pretty strong, though by no means equally so, which could offer to the different creeds a secure asylum, and could form one with another coalitions capable of resisting the head of that incohesive coalition which was called the Empire of Germany. In the 16th century, on the contrary, the unity of the French monarchy was established, and it was all, throughout its whole extent, subject to the same laws and the same master, as regarded the religious bodies as well as the body politic. In this monarchy, however, there did not happen to be, at the date of the 16th century, a sovereign audacious enough and powerful enough to gratify his personal passions at the cost of embroiling himself, like Henry VIII, with the spiritual head of Christendom, and, from the mere desire for a change of wife, to change the regimen of the church in his dominions. Francis I, on the contrary, had scarcely ascended the throne, when, by abolishing the Pragmatic Sanction and signing the Concordat of 1516, he attached himself more closely to the papacy. The nascent Reformation, then, did not meet in France with either of the two important circumstances, politically considered, which in Germany and in England rendered its first steps more easy and more secure. It was in the cause of religious creeds alone, and by means of moral force alone, that she had to maintain the struggles in which she engaged. At the beginning of the 16th century there lived at a small castle near Gap in Dauphiny, in the bosom of a noble and unostentatiously pious family, a young man of ardent imagination, fiery temperament, and energetic character, who shared his relatives' creeds and joined in their devotions, but grew weary of the monotony of his thoughts and of his life. William Farel heard talk of another young man, his contemporary and neighbor, Peter du Terrail, even now almost famous under the name of Bayard. "Such sons," was said in his hearing, "are as arrows in the hand of a giant. Blessed is he who has his quiver full of them." Young Farel pressed his father to let him go too, and make himself a man in the world. The old gentleman would willingly have permitted his son to take up such a life as Bayard's, but it was towards the University of Paris, "that mother of all the sciences, that pure and shining mirror of the faith," that the young man's aspirations were directed. The father at first opposed, but afterwards yielded to his wishes; and about 1510 William Farel quitted Gap and arrived at Paris. The questions raised by the councils of Bale and Florence, and by the semi political, semi ecclesiastical assembly at Tours, which had been convoked by Louis XII., the instruction at the Parisian University, and the attacks of the Sorbonne on the study of Greek and Hebrew, branded as heresy, were producing a lively agitation in the public mind. A doctor of theology, already advanced in years, of small stature, of mean appearance, and of low origin, Jacques Lefebvre by name, born at Etaples in Picardy, had for 17 years filled with great success a professorship in the university. "Amongst many thousands of men," said Erasmus, "you will not find any of higher integrity or more versed in polite letters." "He is very fond of me," wrote Zwingle about him; "he is perfectly open and good. He argues, he sings, he plays, and he laughs with me at the follies of the world." Some circumstance or other brought the young student and the old scholar together. They liked one another, and soon became friends. Farel was impressed by his master's devotion as well as learning. He saw him on his knees at church praying fervently, and "never," said he, "had I seen a chanter of mass who chanted it with deeper reverence." But this old fashioned piety did not interfere at all with the freedom of the professor's ideas and conversations touching either the abuses or the doctrines of the church. "How shameful it is," he would say, "to see a bishop soliciting people to drink with him, caring for nought but gaming, constantly handling the dice and the dice box, constantly hunting, hallooing after birds and game, frequenting bad houses! Religion has but one foundation, but one end, but one head, Jesus Christ blessed forever. He alone trod the winepress. Let us not, then, call ourselves by the name of St. Paul, or Apollos, or St. Peter." These free conversations worked, not all at once, but none the less effectually, upon those who heard them. "The end was," says Farel, "that little by little the papacy slipped from its place in my heart; it did not come down at the first shock." At the same time that he thus talked with his pupils, Lefebvre of Etaples published a commentary on the epistles of St. Paul, and then a commentary on the Gospels. "Christians," said he, "are those only who love Jesus Christ and his word. May everything be illumined by his light. Through it may there be a return of times like those of that primitive church which devoted to Jesus Christ so many martyrs. May the Lord of the harvest, foreseeing a new harvest, send new and diligent laborers. My dear William," he added, turning to Farel and taking his hand, "God will renew the world, and you will see it." It was not only professors and pupils, scholars grown old in meditation, and young folks eager for truth, liberty, action, and renown, who welcomed passionately those boundless and undefined hopes, those yearnings towards a brilliant and at the same time a vague future, at which they looked forward, according to the expression used by Lefebvre of Etaples to Farel, to a "renewal of the world." Men holding a social position very different from that of the philosophers, men with minds formed on an acquaintance with facts and in the practice of affairs, took part in this intellectual initiated it. "Those people," he said, "do nothing but bring trouble into the state." Troubles, indeed, in otherwise tranquil provinces where the Catholic faith was in great force, often accompanied the expression of those wishes for reform to which the local clergy themselves considered it necessary to make important concessions. A serious fire took place at Troyes in 1524. "It was put down," says M. Boutiot, a learned and careful historian of that town, "to the account of the new religious notions, as well as to that of the Emperor Charles V.'s friends and the Constable de Bourbon's partisans. As early as 1520 there had begun to be felt at Troyes the first symptoms of repressive measures directed against the Reformation. In 1523, 1527, and 1528 provincial councils were held at Meaux, Lyons, Rouen, Bourges, and Paris, to oppose the Lutherans. These councils drew up regulations tending to reformation of morals and of religious ceremonies. They decided that the administration of the sacraments should take place without any demand for money, and that preachers in their sermons should confine themselves to the sacred books, and not quote poets or profane authors. They closed the churches to profane assemblies and burlesques (fetes des fous). They ordered the parish priests in their addresses (au prône) to explain the gospel of the day. They ruled that a stop should be put to the abuses of excommunication. They interdicted the publication of any book on religious subjects without the permission of the bishop of the diocese. Troyes at that time contained some enlightened men. William Bude Budæus was in uninterrupted communication with it. The Pitou family, represented by their head, Peter Pitou, a barrister at Troyes, and a man highly thought of, were in correspondence with the Reformers, especially with Lefebvre of Etaples." And thus was going on throughout almost the whole of France, partly in the path of liberty, partly in that of concessions, partly in that of hardships, the work of the Reformation, too weak as yet, and too disconnected to engage to any purpose in a struggle, but even now sufficiently widespread and strong to render abortive any attempt to strangle it. Section 21.